Projections are a very important part of the game asset workflow, and we often want to transfer high poly detail from a sculpt onto a low poly mesh, or add detail to an existing object without having to modify its topology. In this video we'll show you how to set up projections in GamiFlow for both sculpts and decals. So let's start with the most obvious use case for projections and baking in general, which is when you've got a high poly sculpt and you want to project all its details onto a lower poly retopologized mesh, which, as you can see, is definitely lower poly. So what we want is get those three meshes to project onto this one, and there is one way to tell GamiFlow to do this, which is to go in the object settings, and then you've got some bake options. So first we're going to untick include self, because we do not want this low poly mesh to project onto itself. And then we're going to add 3 slots for each of our sculpts, and we're going to manually link them, and done. And then important, we say those are projections. So if we don't do that and those all those 3 objects are inside our working set, then whenever we click on unwrap, for example, it will try to unwrap those sculpts, which is never a good idea. But if it's set as projected, for example, GamiFlow will know those are not to be processed, or as those are just sculpts. So we've got this, we've got 3 sculpts on it. So if we make low, let's see what we've got. Let's hide all the sculpts. And as expected, we've only got our low poly retopologized mesh. If we make high, then we end up with our three sculpts. But we can see that the naming is a little different. So it starts with face underscore high and then eyes. So this is the naming convention that Substance Painter expects when baking, so that it knows what gets baked onto what. And I think now all we have to do is export, and then we're good to go. We're now in Painter and we can start our bake. So we go to the bake menu. I've already filled in everything. You need to set the high definition mesh where you're going to find it. You can set the anti-aliasing. You must say match by name, and that should do it. We can just launch the bake, and it already looks pretty good. And yep, perfect. And now for decals, I'm going to show you how to make a die and get the little holes baked into it without having to use actual geometry like booleans and whatnot that always make things a little difficult and nasty. The idea is we've got that floating geometry on each side, which looks like a hole but is just floating above the surface, and what we want is to bake it into our mesh. So what we do is we make 3 projections, 1 for each side. We assign the meshes, and then we set it to decal. Then all we have to do is make low, make high, and export. So in Painter we can now try baking everything. I've already set the high poly mesh here, and we have to set by mesh name for the match. That's always something you want to do, but more importantly here we want in the ambient occlusion to say ignore backface is by mesh name, and if you use bent normals you should also do the same, and I can't believe this isn't already a default setting in Painter. But in any case we can see that the bake is going pretty well, and let's see. Yep, it's exactly what we want. We've got some nice baked in holes with materials and everything. And for those wondering what the difference is between regular projections and decals, like this was done without using the decal, or just with standard projection, or even baked without the by mesh name option in the occlusion. And it looks fine at first glance, but if we switch to the ambient occlusion channel, we can see that all our decals are now projecting ambient occlusion, which is not really ideal. So if you set it to decal and set up Painter to ignore the back faces when relevant, it will completely ignore the occlusion from the back faces, and you'll get a nice clean bake. So you should now be able to easily get nice details on low poly meshes without too much hassle. Nice!